Emergency, emergency, emergency. This is Tango, Foxtrot, Romeo. Can you hear me?
Pilot training includes emergency procedures and has done so since flight training began. But are you really prepared should something happen on one of your flights? In this episode, I'm going to look at pilot responses in real emergencies, the training we receive, and some tips to help you should the worst happen. I'm going to discuss all that and more coming right up. So strap in and let's get into it.
Good morning, 7614, 95 Mallow, 7 POB with altitude.
Coordinating, Halo, and runner, bank, balance, bank pressure, rolling to 30 degrees. That's 30 degrees there. Stand by, star 9000, 1013, KFI 25.
G'day everyone and welcome to episode 147 of the Flight Training Australia podcast, the podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. G'day, I'm your host Trent Robinson. Thank you for joining me for another episode. Hope you've had a wonderful week. It's definitely getting warmer and windier down south, storms going through, all sorts of weather going on, all sorts of challenges for pilots everywhere. So make sure you do stay safe. Check those weather forecasts. Give yourself some plenty of fuel, and stay safe out there. Part of the process of dealing with emergency procedures and things is being prepared. And flight training goes to a point where that's definitely going to help. But it really is a foundational level. Unless you seek further training, like loss of control training, UPRT training, emergency procedure drills, renewals, all that sort of thing, flight reviews, and push yourself a little bit further. But it really is one of the most critical aspects of flying, because if we get it wrong, it could mean the difference between our last flight or not. Thankfully, we do operate in an incredibly safe environment for the most part, but it only has to go wrong once, and sometimes that's something that's not in our control, that our response and reaction to it really will make all the difference. One of the biggest factors with all of this is the mere shock and startle and surprise factor when something like this happens. You can imagine you're just putting along, having a great time, enjoying the scenery, and then suddenly, bam, whatever it is has now got your full attention. It's human nature to feel that jolt of adrenaline when something goes wrong, be it an engine failure, a fire, a simple or complex system malfunction. It could be a passenger problem. All right, your heart rate starts to skyrocket, your mind races, and if we're not careful, panic can quickly set in. But of course, here's the thing. Panicking, screaming for help on the radio, it's not going to help. In fact, it will, hands down, make the situation worse.
November 9815, Lima, Fort Dodge Radio, go ahead.
I have no idea where I'm going. I'm going to crash. Mayday, mayday, mayday.
9815, Lima, say last known position.
I have no idea. Mayday, mayday, mayday. I'm going to crash.
9815, Lima, say altitude.
Rolling. I'm rolling. Oh, my God. Help.
All right. Absolutely chilling stuff, isn't it? And I hope that doesn't rattle anybody listening and make you a bit stressed and upset. No doubt, irrespective of, whether we have a bit of a laugh at the overreaction or the panic or anything else, you surely can put yourself in that situation. Imagine, the fear and the terror, depending on your level of training, your experience. It's hard to put ourselves in these situations until we're actually there ourselves. Now, in the cockpit, your first job has to be, in any emergency, is to fly the aeroplane. All right, a panic call for help, it's not going to save you if the aeroplane is out of control. The first and most crucial step is always to take that deep breath and remember the golden rule: aviate, navigate, communicate, in that order.
cannot control the airplane descending.
Startled surprise can impair your decision making and reaction time. Right, but you can train your mind to respond differently. And the more you practice for emergencies, the more muscle memory takes over, and you can get in control of the aeroplane rather than wasting precious time calling for help on the radio when help can't come. This will help you deal with the situation and gain that mental bandwidth to work through it logically. So how can you improve your chances and your response in an actual in-flight emergency? Well, let's run through a few typical, probably most common emergencies that you're likely to come across. And the first one would have to be engine failure. When the engine stops, the first thing you're going to feel is shock or disbelief. The whole, this can't be happening, what's going on reaction, right? But this is where the training needs to kick in. Maintain control by setting the best glide speed. Do your trouble checks. Now, if you're going to have an engine failure, when you start your training, you'll typically be at 2,500 feet and do your practice force landing. You'll be typically in a nice high position so that you can come around to your high key upwind, low key abeam the threshold, and then come around and land. Real life is not necessarily going to be like that. You need to learn to prioritize. And again, fly the aeroplane, plan the approach, have to be the top two priorities. After that, we can look at trouble checks and we can look at radio calls and everything else if time permits. When we're doing our engine failure drills, part of the problem as well is the risk mitigation that is put in by flight schools. The simple fact of the matter is we are limited in where and how we can conduct forced landing training, and this is purely for safety. Usually going around at 500 feet, although Part 91 regs do give permission now to go lower as long as we've got landowner permission, and of course it's suitably mitigated. But we need to add more realism to engine failures and engine failure training rather than it being planned and known event that's going to happen that day. We all have heard stories of turning off the fuel, pulling the mixture, all that sort of thing. There's a lot going for that. Why? Because it gets an actual response. It gives you that startle and surprise. It makes you go, well, hang on, what's going on? I wasn't expecting this. I didn't see the instructor's hand reach for the throttle or the mixture. So is this the one real? This is how you're potentially going to react. Now, there's arguments for and against all this. It's dangerous. You shouldn't do that. It's not in the POH. And I get all that. And this is where simulators and things can come in as well. But there comes to a point where are we over mitigating and making emergency procedure training and flight training as a whole too protected and too safe? I'll be talking about the Barron incident and the way we do engine failures in the coming weeks. And part of the response to that was we should only be using throttles and not mixtures, and we need to, put all these procedures in place. Well, the big argument against all that is we're not just here to practice a drill. We can do that in a simulator, right? This is to deal with an aeroplane that is or isn't performing well, the dynamics of radio calls, procedures, what is actually out in front of us, trees, buildings, houses, and all that goes into our decision-making processes of where we're going to land or how we're going to maneuver an aeroplane back to a suitable landing site. I'm not going to be there to hold your hand or your instructor when all this happens. It's not going to be set up in a nice, ideal, perfect setting. It's going to happen when it happens, how it happens. And this is what we need to be realistic as instructors and realistic as pilots to understand that there's no time to cotton wool and try and make it a nice, pleasant experience, because that's not what we're training for. Other likelihood events with engine failures is not just a full engine failure, but maybe a partial one. I know giving students and check pilot, when doing check flights, a partial engine failure, it actually completely throws them because they've probably never done it before. It's so important to think about how we're going to manage this situation. They go to shut down the engine. I go, well, hang on, the engine's producing power. Why don't just let it quit? Use the power that you've got to help get yourself to a safe landing site. If it's there in reserve, you'd be a fool not to use it. But we're so conditioned to shut down the engine and set best glide, we're not looking at this whole engine failure problem holistically enough and thinking about the reality of the different styles of engine failure, I guess you could call it, that we could have.
Toronto departure, mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Endeavour Flight 4826. Declared emergency, just had a mark up an electrical fire up in the cockpit. Looks like it's out currently. Requesting a return back to Toronto immediately.
Endeavour 4826, turn right, heading 260 vectors for Toronto. You can descend and maintain 8,000.
260, 8,000 for Toronto, Endeavour 4826.
All right, electrical failures. Tricky one to simulate other than turning things off or pretending that things are no longer available. All right, but when that smoke starts appearing in the cockpit, you've got to act quickly. It could go into a full fire. It could just continue smoking and smoldering. But toxic fumes are now entering the cockpit. You need to take some action. Understanding the electrical system, how it works, how we can actually effectively isolate components, turn everything off by hand, then reintroduce the power and gradually introduce the critical avionics and items that we need and leave everything else off. And as long as the smoke doesn't reappear, we're probably going to be okay. But we then want to get on the ground and land as soon as practical. But first and foremost, fly the aeroplane. What about a fire in flight? Okay, I've done simulated engine fire scenarios multiple times. If you have an engine fire, be it a single engine or a twin engine aeroplane, you've really only got one option. You need to pull the fuel source, get down as fast as possible. If you happen to be able to smother it, great, get it on the ground and do a precautionary landing or forced landing. The risks of reintroducing the fuel if the fire goes out is more than likely just going to reintroduce the fire. All right, so it's a very alarming situation, but again, we must remain calm and collected. Cut the fuel, cut the mixture, and land ASAP. Remember, if the fire builds, enters the cockpit and smoke, this is toxic. It's going to obscure your vision. It's going to make it hard to breathe. And then you need to use a fire extinguisher. Again, if you're by yourself, now we're having to divide our attention over multiple tasks. Not to mention the fact that the fire extinguisher itself is a threat to us as well because it's an oxygen thief. It's going to remove the oxygen from the air, making it basically impossible to breathe. And it's just an unpleasant experience all around. All right. So how you react and what you're going to do, it all comes down to understanding your aircraft and its systems. If you have a good understanding of these things, familiar with the emergency checklists, the procedures, the processes, where the switches are, where the key circuit breakers are, and how to go about these things, and thinking about them in not just simple, easy to do scenarios, but practice them in challenging situations. Forced landings down low, up high, stretching the distance you've got to get to make sure that every foot per minute descent counts. Think about the 210 landing into Bankstown. Irrespective of what the cause is, leaving the gear and the flap up instead of just dropping it, because that's what you're taught to do, made all the difference in them making the airfield and walking away from that crash landing. Regular training and scenario-based training and rehearsals can build your confidence and help reduce the startle effect, making you more efficient, when and if the time comes. I've had a few emergencies myself, where I've lost a cylinder on one engine, had impulse coupling go on an engine, on magneto, throwing out the timing, running rough. I've had a crash landing, had an engine failure in the Tiger Moth. All right, but how we react is what matters. Working through the problem, working through the situation. Do I stay airborne? Do I divert? Or do I need to get this thing on the ground right now? And sometimes that choice is taken away from you and made for you. So ultimately, remember, stay calm, fly the airplane, remember your training. You've got this. All right, guys. I hope that's given you some food for thought to help you think about those sort of things. Again, talk to your instructors. Next flight review, next proficiency check. Ask to go through some drills, some procedures. Make them challenging. It doesn't matter if you fail. It's all about seeing how you're going to perform in these situations as close to the real thing as we can make it whilst remaining safe. And you can always continue, repeat the exercises and improve. All right, everyone. If you're not on Patreon, make sure you go and subscribe. There's some free articles there. All you have to do is sign up for free. Of course, if you want to support the work I'm doing, if you think it's worth a cup of coffee a month, you can start off the most basic membership right through to the two top tiers. And all of that money goes towards production and equipment needed for putting out this episode and some videos and everything else that's coming up in the future. Speaking of which, wet season seminar is pretty much finished. I didn't quite get it done this weekend, but it will be out the next couple of days, guaranteed. So remember to keep an eye out on that. That'll be out on YouTube. Jump on there and subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell so you get an email when it's gone out. And of course, I'll also let you all know on social media. All right, everyone. Thank you for all the reviews. Thank you for all the messages. Keep them all coming. In the meantime, please stay safe. Remember the golden rule. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Cheers, everyone.